All right, everyone, get ready because today we are really diving deep into decentralized cloud computing with Flux.
Yeah, it's a fascinating space to be in right now.
It is. We're talking about potentially ditching those huge AWS bills and instead tapping into this global network of computing power. And that's the promise of Flux.
Definitely.
So whether you're, a tech enthusiast, maybe you're a business owner, or just really curious about where the internet is headed, well, this deep dive is for you.
And what makes it even more interesting is that Flux is not just some, far off idea. It's real. It's got real applications, and we're going to, unpack all of that a little bit later.
Right, because anyone can say, oh, we're the next big thing, but Flux is actually out there making it happen. But before we get too far ahead of ourselves, let's back up a bit for our listeners who maybe are hearing about Flux for the very first time. What exactly are we talking about here?
So in the simplest terms, think of Flux as this decentralized alternative to those big cloud providers that we all know, like
Hmm.
Amazon Web Services or AWS. But instead of relying on these massive data centers that are controlled by one company, Flux uses a global network of users, just regular people, contributing their computing power.
So instead of one central hub, it's more like this network spread across the globe, kind of like the internet itself, right?
Exactly. It's all about decentralization. And here's where it gets even cooler. Those users who are contributing your computing power, they're actually getting rewarded for it, with Flux tokens.
Okay.
It's a system called proof of work, or POW for short.
Okay, I think I'm following you, but for some of our listeners who maybe aren't as familiar with like the nitty-gritty of blockchain, let's break down this whole proof of work thing a little more. What does it actually look like when you put it into practice?
Okay, so imagine like a giant global Sudoku puzzle.
Okay.
So in Flux, you've got computers on the network,
Mm.
and they're constantly racing to solve these complex math problems.
Hmm.
That's the work part of proof of work. The first one to solve it, they get to add the next block of transactions to the Flux blockchain. And that's how, all the transactions are verified. They're added to this permanent record on the network.
So it's like this decentralized competition to keep everything secure and running smoothly.
Yeah, exactly.
And those who win, those who are doing the work, they're rewarded with these Flux tokens.
Right.
That's actually pretty ingenious.
It is, and it creates this really cool incentive system. So the more computing power you put in, the better your chances of solving those puzzles and earning those rewards.
Yeah.
It's one of the main things that keeps the whole network secure and stops any one entity from taking control.
So it's not even just about cost saving then, it's about having this more secure way to power the internet, a more democratic way.
You got it. And that shift from like the centralized to the decentralized, well, it's got huge implications, especially when we're talking about businesses.
Let's get into it then. How does this decentralized approach actually translate into real cost savings? I mean, that's what everyone wants to know, right?
Mhm. Oh, yeah, for sure. So with the traditional way, like AWS, you're basically renting their infrastructure.
Right.
They own it, they run it, and as you grow, well, so do your bills. Those costs can get out of control, especially for companies that need a ton of computing power.
Yeah. You're kind of stuck with their pricing, which can change, and you're locked into contracts. Not exactly ideal.
No, not at all. But with Flux, you're cutting out that middleman. So instead of paying a premium to this one company, you're tapping into this network where the competition between all those node operators, are the ones solving those Sudoku puzzles.
Right.
Well, that competition keeps the cost down.
So it's basic supply and demand.
Exactly.
More node operators, more competition, and that leads to better pricing for businesses.
Right. And because you're not locked into some expensive contract, you've got the flexibility to scale your resources up or down, whatever you need, and you're not penalized for it.
Okay.
You just pay for what you use. That's a big deal for businesses with needs that are always changing.
No, that's what I'm talking about. But it's more than just saving money, right? There are other perks to this whole decentralized approach.
Absolutely, yeah. Let's say you're a medium-sized company and you're using AWS to host your website. Everything's going great until, bam, AWS crashes.
Oh.
Suddenly your website is down, your customers can't reach you, and you're losing money fast.
I've been there. It's the worst feeling.
Oh, it is.
Especially these days when everybody expects websites to always be up. Downtime like that can really hurt a business.
Big time. But now imagine that same thing happening, but you're using Flux. Because the network is spread out over all these nodes, if one node goes down, it's not a huge deal. it's far less likely to take the entire system down.
So it's like this built-in backup, but on a global scale.
Precisely. And on top of the reliability, there's the whole data privacy and security issue.
Hmm.
And these days, that's a major concern for businesses of all sizes.
So with Flux, it's not just about keeping websites up. It sounds like it could totally change how companies handle their data, keep it safe and even save money while they're at it. But I do have one question that keeps popping up in my mind. With the regular cloud guys, companies basically hand over their data and just hope it's being taken care of. How does that work with something like Flux, where it's all decentralized? Where does all that data actually go if it's not in one spot?
That's a really great question. And it gets to the core of why decentralized systems are so groundbreaking. With Flux, you see, your data isn't stored in just one place. Instead, it gets chalked up into these encrypted chunks and spread out across that whole network of nodes that we talked about.
Right.
Think of it kind of like a digital jigsaw puzzle, where all the pieces are scattered all over the world.
Gotcha.
So even if somebody managed to get into one node, all they'd get is this tiny piece of the puzzle. It wouldn't be much use to them.
Okay, so it's like having this built-in security system that's almost impossible to break. That's a pretty strong selling point for businesses worried about hackers and data leaks.
Absolutely. And it gets even better. Remember when we were talking about transparency before?
Right.
Well, because every single transaction on Flux is recorded on the blockchain, you have this crystal clear record of where your data is all the time. It's like having a digital trail for all your information.
So no more guessing games about where your data went or who looked at it.
Nope.
You've got that transparent record right there on the blockchain. That changes everything for data security.
Exactly. Now, let's shift gears a bit and talk about censorship resistance.
Okay.
We're living in a time where online platforms, services, they can be censored or even shut down completely, depending on where you are in the world.
Yeah, we've seen it happen, and it can be a nightmare for businesses and just regular people who rely on those platforms. And that's not even touching on what it means for, freedom of speech, being able to access information freely.
It's a big deal. But with Flux, because it's decentralized and spread out across the globe, it's way more resistant to this kind of censorship. No single entity can just shut it down or decide what's allowed and what isn't.
So it's like a more open, more democratic internet powered by the people for the people.
That's the idea.
I like it. It's a really exciting thought. But let's be real for a second. We've covered a lot of ground here: cost savings, security, censorship resistance, data privacy. It all sounds amazing, but let's address the big question. How does Flux actually measure up to the heavy hitters like AWS when it comes to real-world use?
Yeah.
Because a platform is only as good as the number of people actually using it, right?
That's the million-dollar question, no doubt. And while Flux is still relatively new compared to giants like AWS, things move incredibly fast in the world of decentralized tech.
That's true.
We're already seeing companies, especially in the blockchain and Web3 world, picking Flux because of its unique blend of affordability, security, and flexibility.
Can you give us some specific examples? How are businesses using Flux right now in the real world?
Absolutely. One area where we're seeing huge growth is in decentralized finance, or DeFi for short. Imagine a world where you can lend, borrow, and earn interest on your money without ever setting foot in a traditional bank.
Okay, I'm all ears.
That's the potential of DeFi, and Flux is a big part of making it happen. We're seeing DeFi platforms use Flux to host their applications, taking advantage of its decentralized setup for better security and resilience.
Okay, so that's starting to show how this technology can work in real life. DeFi is a hot topic, so it makes sense that Flux is making its mark there. But it's not just about finance, is it? What other industries are hopping on board with Flux?
Another area that's really interesting is the gaming industry.
Okay.
Picture online games, where players actually own their in-game stuff, their items, their characters, everything.
Oh, wow.
It's a massive change from those centralized servers controlled by game developers to something more driven by the players, and Flux is making it possible.
That's wild. So we're talking about everything from decentralized financial apps to the future of gaming, all powered by Flux. Seems like this tech has the potential to really shake things up in all sorts of industries.
It does.
But let's not forget, Flux is still relatively new to the cloud computing scene. What are some of the things that Flux needs to overcome, to really go head-to-head with those big names and become more mainstream? It really feels like we're at this turning point where all this new tech is breaking through and becoming, well, normal. But you're right, it's always a challenge when you're trying to change how things are usually
Yeah.
done. What are some of the hurdles that Flux have to get over as it grows?
One of the biggest challenges for any new technology is just getting the word out there.
Yeah.
Flux is doing a great job of that, but there's still a lot of explaining to do. So people get not just what Flux is, but why it's important.
It's about showing people how it can actually help them, right? Like in their everyday lives, their businesses. Because let's be honest, blockchain can still seem kind of intimidating to a lot of people.
Absolutely. And that leads to another hurdle, which is user experience.
Right.
For Flux to really take off, it needs to be easy for everyone to use. That means making user-friendly interfaces, breaking down those complex ideas, and just making the whole thing more intuitive. We're seeing progress, but it's definitely a work in progress.
It's like building that bridge between the complex tech and the people who can benefit from it. Because at the end of the day, technology is only as good as its ability to solve problems, right?
Exactly. And that's what makes this whole thing so exciting. When we start talking about Flux and decentralized tech in general, we're talking about solving some of the biggest issues we face today.
Okay, you've got my attention. So what does the future look like? How could Flux change things on a bigger scale?
Okay, let's take supply chains, for example.
Okay.
Right now, they're incredibly complicated, global, and often, well, not very transparent. But with blockchain, we can have these tamper-proof records of every single step in the chain, from where the raw materials come from all the way to the final product.
So no more mysteries about where stuff comes from or how it's made.
Exactly.
Everything's trackable and verifiable on the blockchain. That could be huge for things like food, medicine, even clothes.
Exactly. And beyond that, think about what it could do for digital identity, voting systems.
Right.
With blockchain, we can create secure systems that are much harder to cheat or manipulate. It's about giving people control over their data, their digital lives.
Wow, now we're talking about some real change. It's about shifting power, making things fairer, and giving individuals more say.
That's the power of decentralization.
Right.
And it's not just some far-off dream.
Right.
With platforms like Flux, we're already starting to see it happen.
It's pretty mind-blowing when you think about it, but
Right.
for anyone listening who's just starting to learn about Flux and all this decentralized stuff, it can be a lot to wrap your head around.
Oh, for sure. And that's why it's key to remember that you don't need to be an expert right away.
Right.
Just start exploring, asking questions, connecting with the Flux community. There's tons of information, online forums, social media, videos, articles, you name it.
And don't be afraid to dive in and try things out. There are so many amazing projects already running on Flux, and the best way to learn is by doing. Who knows, maybe you'll even get inspired to build something yourself.
Exactly. This is still a young field. It's changing all the time. The possibilities are endless.
It sounds like it. Well, on that note of endless possibility, we've reached the end of our deep dive into the world of Flux.
It's been great.
It has. Hopefully everyone listening is feeling as fired up about this technology as we are.
I hope so.
And as always, we encourage you to keep exploring, keep those questions coming, and keep diving deep into the ever-evolving world of technology. Until next time.